Liam hadn't spoken more than 5 words to anyone in weeks, but someone had been paying attention. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Liam Parker was the kind of boy most people didn't notice. He wasn't disruptive. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't funny or loud or particularly gifted at anything. He simply existed in the quiet spaces between school bells, never drawing attention, never making a fuss. At 12 years old, he was already a master of disappearing in plain sight. Each morning, Liam arrived long before his classmates, always alone. No one knew where he came from or how he got there. He just appeared. Sometimes he was already seated in the cafeteria when the kitchen staff unlocked the milk fridge. Other times, he sat on the steps out back, hood pulled tight over his face, pretending to read a worn paperback while keeping one eye on the road. He never ran. He never laughed. And most days, he didn't speak. He sat in the far corner of the cafeteria with a tattered backpack and a silent stare. When others arrived, he drifted to the back of his classroom like a shadow, present but unreachable. Teachers gave up trying to pull him into group work. Students gave up trying to include him in anything. Mr. Reynolds noticed. He noticed everything. In his 15 years as the school's janitor, Mr. Reynolds had become an expert in the quiet patterns that most others missed. He knew which lockers always stuck, which kids chewed their pens, which teachers left coffee stains behind without realizing it. And he noticed Liam from the first day he showed up without a word. There was something in the way the boy carried himself, like someone who had already learned that asking for help came with a cost. Mr. Reynolds recognized that posture. He'd seen it in the mirror once or twice, years ago, before the wrinkles, before the white in his beard. So he watched and waited. He noticed how Liam never touched his breakfast milk, even on days when the cafeteria offered warm sausage biscuits. How he always wore the same hoodie, sleeves stretched at the cuffs and faded at the elbows. How his eyes stayed low, as if searching the ground for something long lost. How his shoes were a size too big, soles peeling slightly at the toes. Mr. Reynolds didn't say anything. Not yet. He knew better than to spook a skittish heart. He'd learned that asking the wrong question too soon could make a quiet kid disappear even further. So instead, he worked around Liam's silence. He kept the classroom spotless, wiped Liam's desk a little more gently, picked up the broken pencil Liam had left behind, and sharpened it before placing it back exactly where it had been. But something gnawed at him. Sometimes it was the way Liam flinched at sudden noise. Other times it was how he seemed to watch every adult in the room without ever meeting their eyes. Mr. Reynolds had lived long enough to know what trauma looked like, what hunger for safety, not just food, looked like. And he couldn't ignore it anymore. On a rainy Wednesday in March, with the sky hanging low and gray above the school, Mr. Reynolds stood outside Liam's classroom long after the last bell. The building echoed with emptiness, the kind that settles heavy after a long day. Dust danced in the shafts of fading sunlight. He walked to Liam's desk, hesitated for a moment, then pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket. He didn't write much. Just 7 words. I see you. You matter. R. He folded the note once, slid it just under the edge of the desk, and walked away. No one saw him do it, and that was the point. The next morning, Liam arrived at 7:04, exactly 11 minutes earlier than usual. His steps were cautious, calculated. He sat at his desk, opened his notebook, and paused. The note was there. He didn't react, didn't look around, didn't frown, didn't smile. He simply unfolded it, read it once, folded it again, and placed it in his backpack. Then he did something Mr. Reynolds didn't expect. He finished his breakfast milk. The cafeteria was noisier than usual the next day. Someone had spilled juice on table 4, a teacher's radio squawked instructions in the hallway, and the soda machine let out a sputtering cough before dying mid-vend. In all the movement and morning chaos, no one noticed the boy at the edge of the room. No one but Mr. Reynolds. Liam sat alone, as always, a tray in front of him. Today it had more than milk, a folded pancake, an apple, and a small tub of peanut butter, items he typically pushed aside or didn't touch at all. But this morning, he ate. Slowly, methodically, with no expression. But he ate every bite. And when he stood to return his tray, Mr. Reynolds saw something else. A corner of folded paper sticking out of the side pocket of Liam's backpack. The same paper he had left under Liam's desk the night before. 7 words. 7 words that had traveled farther than he expected. Later that day, Mr. Reynolds passed Liam in the hallway. They were alone. Liam was heading to the library, Mr. Reynolds with a mop and bucket in tow. As they neared each other, Liam's eyes flicked up, just for a second. Then something remarkable happened. He nodded. It wasn't much. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but to Mr. Reynolds, it was monumental. That simple nod, barely more than a twitch, was a response. A thank you. A signal from behind the fortress walls Liam had built for himself. That night, Mr. Reynolds sat in the maintenance office long after his shift had ended. He stared at the empty whiteboard where he usually scribbled supply orders and tool checklists. Instead, he found himself writing a list with a blue dry erase marker. Ways to tell a kid they matter. Remember their name. Notice when they're not there. Leave a note, even if they never reply. Keep showing up. He capped the marker and leaned back in the squeaky chair. He hadn't expected the note to mean anything. Honestly, he thought it might get tossed or ignored, but now he wondered how long it had been since anyone told Liam that he mattered. 2 days after the note, Liam started arriving even earlier. At first, it was only by a few minutes, but by Friday he was sitting at his desk by 6:55 a.m., back straight, eyes alert, still quiet, still reserved. But something had shifted. He began finishing his breakfast. He started bringing a book, flipping pages with focus instead of staring out the window. And once, Mr. Reynolds could have sworn he saw Liam smile, just for a moment, while watching 2 squirrels chase each other across the lawn. The following Monday, Mr. Reynolds left another note, this one tucked behind the pencil tray in Liam's desk. The world's better with you in it. Again, no reaction, no acknowledgement. But that morning, Liam stayed in the cafeteria 10 minutes longer than usual. He didn't eat faster. He simply stayed. On Wednesday, another note. You're not invisible. Not here. That one stayed on Liam's desk all day, folded neatly in a corner, until he quietly slipped it into his pocket at dismissal. Mr. Reynolds didn't talk about the notes to anyone. Not the teachers, not the principal, not even Kathy from the front office, who usually knew everything before it happened. This was between him and the boy, and that was enough. But what Mr. Reynolds didn't know was that Liam had started writing his own notes, not for anyone else, just for himself. In the back of his library book, he began keeping a folded sheet of lined paper with a growing list. Things Mr. R says. I matter. I'm not invisible. The world's better with me in it. Underneath that, in Liam's own careful handwriting, maybe that's true. It started like any other Thursday. The sky was pale and flat, the kind of color that doesn't quite commit to morning. Inside the school, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as teachers prepared their rooms and students trickled in, groggy and half aware. Mr. Reynolds was already making his second round of the building, mop handle balanced across one shoulder, a roll of trash bags under his arm. He nodded to the vice principal as they passed near the cafeteria. His mind, as usual, was half focused on Liam. The boy had come in even earlier than usual, slipping into his usual desk without a sound. Mr. Reynolds had noticed the small smudge of ink on his left thumb, likely from the folded notes he now tucked carefully into his pocket each morning. Liam didn't know it, but he was being watched, not by anyone malicious, not by gossipers or staff, but by someone who had spent a lifetime noticing what others missed. Mr. Reynolds glanced down the hallway and saw that same familiar stillness in Liam's posture. But just as he turned to continue down the corridor, something outside caught his eye. A shimmer of black, a flash of movement, then the unmistakable reflection of polished chrome bumpers. He walked to the front doors and stopped cold. 4 large black SUVs were pulling into the school's small lot, military black, sleek, and imposing. They moved in practiced formation. No hesitation, no confusion. As they parked, men in uniform stepped out in sync, spreading like chess pieces to strategic positions. One vehicle remained unopened until the last. Then, from the front passenger seat, a tall man stepped out. He wore the deep green dress uniform of the U.S. Army, not the kind you see in TV ads, but the real thing, heavy with ribbons, shoulders squared with authority. He looked older than Mr. Reynolds had expected, late 50s perhaps, but his stance was that of a man who never truly relaxed. A face weathered by sun and war and eyes that had seen more than most. He looked up at the building, not like someone who was lost, but like someone who had found what he was looking for. Inside, the school went quiet, eerily so. The usual background noise of chatter and lockers faded into a hush. Teachers poked their heads out of classrooms. Students stopped mid-step. Even the vending machine seemed to pause. The front door opened with a soft buzz. Mr. Reynolds stood just behind the secretary's desk when the man in uniform walked in, flanked by 2 younger officers. He removed his cap respectfully and spoke with calm clarity. "I'm looking for someone who works here," he said, his voice low but firm. "A man named Reynolds. He's the school custodian." The room didn't move. Mr. Reynolds blinked, stepped forward. "I'm Reynolds," he said quietly. The officer offered a nod, not casual, not dismissive. A nod of recognition. The kind you give to someone who has done something important, even if they didn't realize it yet. "Sir," the man said, "my name is Colonel David Harlow, U.S. Army Special Operations Command." He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and withdrew an envelope. "I'm here," he continued, "because of a promise one of my men made before he died." The words landed with weight. The secretary behind the counter covered her mouth with a hand. A teacher in the hallway whispered, "What's going on?" to no one in particular. Colonel Harlow held out the envelope. "This is from Master Sergeant James Thompson," he said, "and it concerns a boy named Liam Parker." Mr. Reynolds didn't reach for it at first, because his hands had started to shake. Mr. Reynolds stared at the envelope as if it might vanish if he blinked. It was crisp and formal, the kind of paper that didn't fold unless you told it to. His name wasn't typed on the front. It was handwritten in neat block letters. He reached out with one calloused hand, fingers trembling slightly, and took it. "May we speak somewhere private?" Colonel Harlow asked. Mr. Reynolds nodded, his throat too tight for words. He led the colonel and his officers down the hallway, past a sea of stunned students and silent teachers, toward the small janitor's office tucked beside the boiler room. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old metal, a place built for fixing things, not for breaking news. The colonel sat across from him, knees barely fitting beneath the workbench that doubled as a desk. "Before I explain," he said gently, "I need to ask something." Mr. Reynolds nodded again. Did you leave a note for a student named Liam Parker? The question felt both surreal and strangely sacred. I did, Reynolds said. A few of them, actually. The colonel leaned forward slightly. Master Sergeant James Thompson was Liam's father. He served under me for 9 years. Quiet, reliable, the kind of man who never needed to say much to lead a whole room. Mr. Reynolds sat back, something heavy pressing against his chest. Sergeant Thompson was deployed 4 months ago, Harlow continued. It was classified. We were deep in territory no one wants to talk about. 2 months in, we lost contact. It took weeks to confirm the worst. Mr. Reynolds didn't speak. His breath had slowed to something shallow and aching. In his final personal effects, the colonel said, voice now quieter, was a letter. Not to his son, but to us, his commanding officers. It was instructions, simple but urgent. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a second envelope, this one creased and weathered. He unfolded it slowly and began to read. If anything happens to me and Liam is left alone, find him. Don't leave him to be forgotten. He's quiet, like I was. He won't ask for help, but he'll need someone to remind him he still matters. The colonel looked up. And then this. If there's someone out there who gives him that, who sees him, find them. Thank them. From Mott. There was a long pause. Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard. I didn't know, he said softly. I just saw a boy who looked like he was carrying too much weight. Colonel Harlow's voice was steadier than his eyes, and that's exactly what he needed. Someone to notice. He continued. After the funeral, Liam's grandparents took him in. They live in Colorado. Good people. But Liam never mentioned anyone from here. Not the school, not friends, nothing. He placed the final letter on the desk, this one in a child's handwriting. But he wrote to me. He said he had been going to a school where one person saw him. Just one. A janitor, he said, who left him notes and never asked questions. Mr. Reynolds ran a hand across his face. I never asked, he said. Didn't want to scare him off. That's what made it matter, the colonel replied. No expectations, just kindness. There was silence in the room for a while, peaceful, like a moment of mourning and honor held at the same time. Then Colonel Harlow stood. We came here today not just for Liam, but for you. This story reached people it was never meant to, and every single one of them agrees what you did, that mattered. He offered his hand. On behalf of the U.S. Army, on behalf of a father who didn't get to come home, and on behalf of a boy who now knows he was never invisible, thank you. Mr. Reynolds rose slowly and took his hand, the shake firm despite the storm inside him. I just wrote a note, he whispered. No, said the colonel, meeting his eyes. You answered one. The air outside the janitor's office felt heavier as Mr. Reynolds and Colonel Harlow stepped back into the hallway. Word had already traveled like wildfire. Though no one quite knew what had happened, everyone could sense something had shifted. Teachers stood silently outside their classrooms. Students whispered. Even the school's principal, a woman known for her firm stride and tighter schedule, paused mid-step as the colonel passed her. But Liam wasn't there. He had slipped away the moment the SUVs pulled up, his instincts honed by months of uncertainty. He didn't run. He never ran. But he disappeared the way only someone who had grown used to being unseen could do. Mr. Reynolds didn't panic. He knew where to look. He found Liam in the back corner of the library, behind 2 rows of encyclopedias no one touched anymore. The boy sat curled against the shelf, knees to chest, hands gripped tightly around the straps of his backpack. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a kind of bracing, the kind of look you wear when you're used to bad news finding you. Mr. Reynolds knelt slowly, not too close. Hey there, he said softly. Liam didn't speak. "There's someone here who came a long way just to thank you," Reynolds said. "He told me about your dad and about what he wanted for you." Liam blinked, but still didn't answer. Mr. Reynolds took a breath. He knew this part had to be careful. "I didn't know," he said. "Not about your dad, not about the rest, but I knew you were carrying more than any kid should." A pause. Liam's eyes flicked up, just for a second. "I didn't leave those notes to fix anything," Mr. Reynolds continued. "I left them because sometimes people need a reminder that they exist, that they matter." Liam finally spoke, voice hoarse and low. "Everyone thought I was fine." Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Yeah, people do that, especially with kids who don't complain." There was a long silence. Then Liam whispered, "I didn't want to be taken away." That hit hard. Mr. Reynolds sat all the way down on the floor beside him. "Is that why you never told anyone you were alone?" Liam nodded, eyes on the carpet. "When my mom left, she just packed a bag and didn't come back. I didn't want to go into some system. My dad always said I was smart enough to take care of myself if I had to." "How long were you alone?" Liam shrugged. "After Christmas." Mr. Reynolds closed his eyes for a moment. That was nearly 3 months. 3 months of coming to school early because there was heat. 3 months of skipping lunch unless someone looked the other way. 3 months of hiding in plain sight while the world spun on around him. "You shouldn't have had to do that," Reynolds said quietly. Liam didn't answer. He didn't cry, he just breathed, deep, shaky, and raw. When Colonel Harlow entered the library minutes later, he stopped a few feet away and waited. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He simply removed his hat and stood at attention. It was Liam who eventually broke the silence. "Did my dad really tell you to come?" "Yes," the colonel replied. "He told us that if anything happened, we were to find the person who helped you remember who you were." Liam blinked. "And you did." The colonel nodded. "We always honor our promises." He held out a folded letter. "Your dad wrote this for you. It was in his pack. He said it should only be given when you were ready." Liam stared at the envelope like it might burn him, but his hand reached out slowly, carefully, and took it. The colonel stood back. "We'll give you time," he said gently. As they walked out, Mr. Reynolds glanced back once. Liam was still sitting on the floor, the envelope now open in his lap, his shoulders trembling in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Sometimes the truth doesn't break us. It frees us. And in that quiet corner of a forgotten library, a boy who had spent months building walls finally let the light back in. By the end of that day, the school didn't feel quite the same. The janitor, who never spoke much, had shaken hands with a colonel in the hallway. A quiet boy had received a letter from his fallen father. And by some invisible current, the news had begun to move. Not loudly, not through official announcements, but in whispers passed between classrooms and staff rooms and homes. It began with the teachers. Mrs. Carter, the 6th grade English teacher, left a sticky note on Liam's desk the next morning. "I kept a copy of that book you borrowed. I think your dad would have liked it too." Mr. Green, who taught math and rarely smiled before 10 a.m., quietly slid a new set of mechanical pencils into Liam's desk drawer. The lunch lady, Miss Pam, made an extra peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut diagonally, no crusts, and handed it to Liam without a word as he passed through the cafeteria. Small things, but the kind of things that ripple. By the 3rd day, the principal had been contacted by someone higher up in the district office, someone who had heard about the soldier's son and the janitor's letter. The conversation was brief, but the message was clear. Keep doing what you're doing. It matters. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, the mood had shifted. The usual complaints about copy machines and late homework gave way to something quieter. more thoughtful. Someone put up a quote on the corkboard. "One kind word can change someone's entire day." Someone else added, "One small act can change someone's life." The next Monday, 2 Army personnel showed up again, this time without the SUVs or salutes. Just quiet uniforms and calm voices. They met with the school counselor and offered something no one had expected, a support program for children of deployed parents, funded entirely by a military family foundation. "We want to make sure no other kid like Liam slips through the cracks," one of them said, "and we want to start here." That same day, Liam stood at his locker when a younger student approached him, a 3rd grader named Mason, who normally clung to his teacher's hand in the hallway. "Hey," Mason said shyly, "my dad's in the Navy. He left last month." Liam didn't say anything at first, but then, slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Mason. Just 7 words. "I see you. You matter. L." Mr. Reynolds saw it from down the hall, and he smiled. Later that week, the story hit local news. Not because the school sent out a press release, but because someone from the district office, moved by what had happened, shared the story anonymously with a community reporter. It wasn't sensationalized. It wasn't dramatized. It was titled simply, "The Janitor, the Boy, and the Note That Changed Everything." Within 48 hours, the article had been shared thousands of times, and with it came letters. Letters from veterans, from parents, from kids who had once been just like Liam. Letters thanking the janitor for doing what so many others hadn't, for noticing, for caring. One message came from overseas, from a deployed unit in Germany. "Tell Mr. Reynolds we've read his story here on base. Remind him he reminded us why we serve." The ripple kept growing. Soon, the school's front office began receiving small packages, books, notes, a plaque that read, "To the one who saw what others missed." The janitor's closet became a kind of shrine, not because Mr. Reynolds asked for it, but because people needed to do something. To recognize that in a world full of noise, a quiet man with a mop had made a noise of his own, one that couldn't be ignored. And Liam? He was changing too. He laughed during recess. He raised his hand in class. He started joining the group at lunch, slowly but surely, like a flower learning how to unfold after a long winter. And each morning, tucked into the corner of his notebook, was that first note. "I see you. You matter." Because some ripples never stop moving. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. No one expected it. Not the students, not the staff, not even Mr. Reynolds. The principal's voice came over the intercom, calm but with a certain formality that hinted something unusual was coming. "Attention all students and faculty. We will be holding a special assembly this Friday morning at 9 a.m. in the gymnasium. Attendance is required. More details to follow." That was it. No explanation, no context, just enough to send a ripple of curiosity through the hallways. Liam didn't ask questions, but Mr. Reynolds noticed the way his eyes lingered on the intercom speaker a little longer than usual. The rest of the week moved differently. Students speculated. Teachers whispered. The PTA brought in folding chairs and banners without explanation. The school band rehearsed the national anthem during lunch, and for once, no one complained about the noise. Mr. Reynolds was asked to polish the gym floor Thursday evening. Not unusual, but the way the principal personally checked in with him afterward, that was new. "Everything's fine, Mr. Reynolds," she said with a soft smile. "You'll see." When Friday morning arrived, the school moved as if rehearsed. Students filed into the gym in orderly lines. Teachers stood a little straighter. The American flag, normally just a quiet fixture on the back wall, seemed to shine a little brighter under the gymnasium lights. At 9:02, the doors at the back opened. The silence that followed was instant. Colonel Harlow walked in again. this time with full dress uniform, accompanied by a handful of fellow servicemen and women. No convoy, no announcement, just presence, steady and sure. He stood at the center of the gym floor as the principal took the mic. "Today," she began, "we're here not just as a school, but as a community." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "You all know Liam Parker, and some of you know Mr. Reynolds, but today you'll hear a story you may not know. One about service, about silence, and about the power of a few words." She turned toward the colonel and stepped back. Colonel Harlow took his place at the microphone. His voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. Master Sergeant James Thompson was a soldier, a father, and a friend. When he passed, he left us with one final request, that we find the person who reminded his son that he still mattered. The colonel turned toward the front row, where Mr. Reynolds sat beside the other staff. "That person," he said, "was your janitor." The gym fell utterly silent. He didn't know who Liam was. He didn't know about the loss, but he left notes, words that changed everything, words that gave Liam a thread of hope, words that honored a fallen father's wish. Then he nodded to one of the officers behind him, who stepped forward holding a glass frame. Inside was the original note. "I see you. You matter, R." Below it, "Presented with honor to Mr. George Reynolds for exceptional compassion and silent service." The colonel faced Reynolds again and spoke one final time. "You didn't ask to be seen, Mr. Reynolds, but today we see you, and we thank you." Then, with the entire school watching, he saluted. A full, formal military salute. Behind him, every uniformed officer did the same, and slowly so did the students. One by one, like dominoes falling in reverence, hundreds of middle schoolers stood, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something wordless. Mr. Reynolds stood as well, his hand shaking slightly as he accepted the frame. He didn't speak, he just nodded deeply, then turned toward Liam, who was already standing, chin lifted, eyes wet. The two locked eyes across the gym. Two people who had saved each other without ever saying it aloud. That day, there were no grades taken, no quizzes, only silence, gratitude, and the quiet kind of pride that stays with you long after the noise fades. In the front office, later that afternoon, the note was scanned and copied. Every classroom got a printout, and taped to every desk in quiet solidarity was the same message: "I see you, you matter." The Monday after the assembly felt different, not just in the way students held their heads a little higher, or in the way teachers smiled more easily, but in the way the school itself seemed to breathe easier, as if a quiet tension that had lived in the walls for months had finally been acknowledged and let go. Mr. Reynolds was back to pushing his mop by 6:30 a.m. sharp, the same way he always had. But something in his posture had changed. Not pride exactly. He had never been one for the spotlight, but purpose, assurance, as if his quiet work now carried a kind of quiet echo. People greeted him more often, not just with nods, but with actual words. "Morning, Mr. Reynolds." "Thanks again for everything." Even the principal, usually too busy to linger in hallways, paused one morning by the lockers and handed him a fresh cup of coffee. "Thought you could use a warm start," she said, smiling. He nodded, still unsure how to respond to kindness aimed back at him. But he appreciated it, deeply. And then there was Liam. He hadn't changed overnight. His silence hadn't vanished, and his cautious glances still lingered at the edges of rooms. But he was walking straighter, eating lunch with others, raising his hand once in a while, not often, but enough to be noticed, He had become visible. He and Mr. Reynolds still didn't talk much. That part of their rhythm remained unchanged, but every now and then, when they crossed paths, Liam would offer a slight smile, and Mr. Reynolds would nod back. A quiet language. Their language. In the cafeteria, the custodial staff had begun placing bowls of fruit on the ends of tables. "Grab one if you need one," the handwritten sign read. No one was forced, no one was asked, but the bowls emptied, and that was enough. In the library, the back corner where Liam once hid had become something else entirely. A small reading nook with pillows and donated books, a sign overhead that simply read, "Here, you're never alone." No one made a big deal about it, but students used it. Not just Liam, others, too. Kids who'd felt the same kind of weight he once carried. Even the staff room changed. Teachers who had once kept to themselves began checking in on each other. A new tradition was born. Each Friday, someone would leave an anonymous note of encouragement in a colleague's mailbox. They called it the Reynolds Rule. Meanwhile, letters continued to arrive from across the country. One envelope from Texas contained 20 handwritten thank you notes from students at a military-based school. Another from Vermont came with a check to be used for books, breakfast, or whatever kindness looks like today. Mr. Reynolds donated the check to the school library. Quietly. He never mentioned it. The librarian figured it out anyway and left a small plaque by the checkout desk that read, "Donated by a man who listens more than he speaks." By spring, the school had changed in ways no one had planned. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, still hallway scuffles, and forgotten homework. But something had shifted at its core. A culture that once overlooked the quietest kids now leaned in, paid attention, asked one more question instead of walking away. And Liam? He'd begun writing again. In a small black notebook, he kept a running list. People who see me. Mr. Reynolds was the first name. Then came Ms. Carter, then Mason, the third grader, then Colonel Harlow, then a long space with no names, until one day Liam wrote, "Me," and circled it twice. 1 year later, the janitor's closet looked almost exactly the same. The mop hung in its usual place. The shelf still creaked when you pulled the cleaning supplies down, and the smell of pine disinfectant clung to the walls like an old familiar coat. But one thing was different. On the back of the door, just above the hooks for jackets and gloves, hung a framed note. The edges were yellowed now, but the words remained bold and clear. "I see you. You matter. R." It had been placed there by the principal, who never asked Mr. Reynolds for permission. She didn't have to. Some things were understood. Outside the closet, life at the school had moved on. Liam was now in 8th grade, taller, a little more confident. He still wore his hoodie most days, but he no longer hid behind it. He had friends now, real ones, and a growing habit of writing quotes on sticky notes and leaving them in unexpected places, lockers, library books, lunch trays. He never signed them, but Mr. Reynolds always knew. One afternoon, a new student arrived, a girl with large eyes and a backpack she kept clutched to her chest like a shield. She didn't speak much, kept her head down, ate lunch alone the first week. Then, one day, a note appeared inside her math book. "You're not invisible, not here." Mr. Reynolds smiled when he saw her reading it from across the cafeteria. The legacy had taken root. On a Thursday in late May, just after the final bell rang, Mr. Reynolds made one last sweep through the halls. He paused outside Liam's home room, now emptied of desks for summer cleaning. On the teacher's whiteboard, in careful handwriting, was a message. "One small note can change everything. Thanks, Mr. R. Miss R." He stood for a long time in that empty room, listening to nothing, feeling everything. 2 weeks into summer break, a letter arrived at the school. It was addressed to Mr. Reynolds in pencil, the handwriting blocky but careful. No return address, just a stamp from Colorado. Inside was a photo. Liam, standing between his grandparents, smiling wide. In his hands, he held a small plaque, an award from a youth writing contest. The title of his winning story? The Janitor's Letter. On the back of the photo, just one line was written, "You were the first person who ever really saw me." Mr. Reynolds tucked the photo into the same drawer where he kept his replacement mop heads, not because he wanted to hide it, but because it belonged somewhere real, not up on a wall like a trophy. He sat down in his squeaky chair and let the silence settle in. He never asked for recognition, never expected thanks. He had simply seen a boy, left a note. And now that note had become a message passed down from student to student, like a secret code for kindness. A reminder that noticing someone, truly seeing them, could alter the direction of an entire life. That fall, the school created a new tradition. Each year, one student would be chosen, not for grades or athletic skill, but for compassion, for noticing the unnoticed, for kindness without reward. They called it the Reynolds Award. The first recipient was a 7th grade girl who had written encouraging letters to every student in the special education classroom, without ever telling anyone. She received the award in front of the whole school. After the applause faded, she approached Mr. Reynolds, holding the small wooden plaque in both hands. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making kindness okay." He smiled. "Was always okay," he said quietly. "We just forgot for a while." She nodded, then stepped back into the crowd. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the school building, Mr. Reynolds locked up for the night. He stepped outside, the air warm, the cicadas just beginning to sing. From his shirt pocket, he pulled a slip of paper. Not a note, a name. Liam Parker. Just to remind himself that he had once written something small and changed something big. He tucked the name back into his pocket, smiled, and walked home. Because sometimes being seen just once is enough to change everything forever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.